Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. In an earlier discussion, we dealt with Israel's geostrategic problems from 3 points of view. Its closest concern, the Palestinians, the neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, and others, all the way to Saudi Arabia, and the more distant ring of the Arabian Gulf, especially Iran, as well as Yemen and Turkey. But this analysis will not be complete if we leave out of this discussion, of course, the United States, its partners and competitors. To focus on them, we have with us from Central Israel, retired Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, co-host of TV7 Middle East Review, who is the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and who formerly served as Israel's Deputy National Security Advisor. It's good to see you, Eran.
Good to be with you again.
It's a pleasure indeed. Also joining us from elsewhere in Central Israel is Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisin, who is a senior fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichmann University and is an intelligence expert among a long list of other distinguished positions that she held over the years. It's great to see you, Miri.
Shalom, Jonathan.
Shalom, shalom. With me in the studio, of course, our TV7 editor at large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
Well, the real question here, which we are discussing, is what are the limits of independence? If no nation is an island, even the mightiest power in the world, the United States, as Joe Biden reminded his audience in the opening night of the Democratic National Convention, Israel obviously is helped either by materiel and sometimes through diplomacy, Security Council, threats against its enemies, deterrence perhaps, and the like. Should Israel heed the requests, sometimes the pleadings of its benefactors or allies or partners? And is the price that Israel is being asked to pay for this sort of cooperation, collaboration, sometimes vital help, is it too high?
Well, let's turn initially to Dr. Lerman. I'd like to ask you particularly, and if we go down memory lane, not so long ago, in February 5th of 2021, we saw the United States announce that it will end its support for offensive Saudi operations against the Houthis in Yemen, namely Ansar Allah, followed also by a decision by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to revocate the FTO designation of the Houthis, namely the Foreign Terrorist Organizations list, and by doing so basically allowing the Iranian proxy to further bolster at the time. And now, just recently, that designation may not have been an FTO. They provided a designation that is somewhat diminished thereof. And now also they announced the support for Saudi Arabia to yet again sell it offensive munitions and systems in order to confront and establish friction with the same Houthis. Is this basically the Americans understanding that they made a mistake, reverting yet again to the policies that were pursued by the Trump administration against this specific Iranian surrogate in the Red Sea? And if I may start just there, and then we'll move to other sectors.
No, I think the switch is of a much larger scope. The administration came in with the hope of negotiating with Iran, of resetting the relationship with Russia, of managing a relationship with China. And by now, it is very clearly cognizant of the fact that the United States finds itself leading the free world. I think that's still worthwhile using that language. Against what a friend of mine recently suggested we should call the crink. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea in close alignment, if not alliance, of the forces which are trying to overthrow the international order that has been there for the last nearly 80 years. and American-led and American sustained. And this realization puts things in a different context. The Houthi question, the Yemeni situation, the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Yemen was seen in isolation as a humanitarian problem 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Nowadays, it is looked upon as part of a strategic equation, hence the need to act directly against the Houthis, as the Americans are doing, in an unimpressive manner, I should say, and hence the need to give the Saudis the capacity to fight them and to back up what Israel has also done to deter the Houthis from further attacks on Israel. So all of this is part of a much larger picture now.
Indeed. With that being said, of course, on the humanitarian aspect, we had United Nations, NGOs, and other organizations come out and urge the Trump administration at the time, particularly U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at the time, to not designate the Houthis due to humanitarian concerns that there may be consequences, dire consequences to the humanitarian condition in Yemen. And the sanctions that were part of that FTO, as was told to me directly by the person who actually was in charge of manufacturing those same sanctions, did not include the humanitarian aid that had to do with deliveries and other aspects to alleviate the concerns that those international bodies had. Nonetheless, the Houthis have embedded themselves economically within all of the infrastructure of Yemen, and therefore anything that was conducted in Yemen at the time had to go through them, and therefore it had to do with rather the recipient rather than the way they initially planned to stream humanitarian aid and medicine into that country. But if we're looking at the broader scheme of things, Mr. Oren said quite correctly that at times the administration came to Israel and said don't, particularly from the early days of this war, some almost 11 months now. We're talking about, of course, the October 7th massacre, subsequently Iran joining the fight on October 8th by greenlighting its proxy, particularly in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks into Israel. We saw on the 17th of October of last year also the Houthis join and others, be they Shiite militias in Syria or in Iraq. And therefore, Colonel Eisin, I'd like to understand when the United States said don't, and this don't was repeated throughout those months multiple times, it wasn't only towards the adversaries of the United States, and by saying the United States, also Israel falls within that category, but it was also a don't towards Israel and its allies and its partners in the region from escalating friction, and by doing so going up the escalation dominance ladder into points that may drive the region into potential conflict or a escalation beyond bounds of controlled capacity. And therefore, within that context, the Israelis had to make very tough decisions every time on breaching that so-called red line that the Americans have set for them. But every time the Americans have not necessarily made the right assessment of the situation, realizing that, okay, don't go into Han Yunis, then don't go into Rafah, don't go into all those other places. And lo and behold, all what they projected may occur as a catastrophe did not culminate.
And here we are, and it's hard to believe it's August 2024. And to a certain degree, Jonathan, I don't want to answer a question with a question, but as I do so, and as I'm listening to what you're saying, that I so agree with, but you're presenting it in an either-or form. And at the end of the day, there's the complexity, and not the complexity of this is hard to understand, but there is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and part of the manifestation, not all of it, is taking place right now, both in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also in Judea and Samaria against the same enemies, and that's part of a greater picture where in the Gulf and Iran stepping in, as you said, from October 8th, Hezbollah in this last week, I'm allowed to smile a bit and say that Israel took action. I enjoyed the show of fireworks that took place a little bit further north in Lebanon than we're used to, where we seem to have attacked something more substantial. And because of that, there were a lot of subsidiary explosions. I'm not sure the United States would have supported Israel doing something like that. There's a difference between Israel taking very concrete steps at a tactical and operational level against very concrete threats, both in the Gaza Strip, trying to find those Hamas operatives, those terrorists, trying to find our hostages, trying to destroy the weapon depots, trying to destroy the underground terrain, all of those aspects, between Israel attacking against these different Hezbollah targets day in, day out, and that zoom out of the United States saying, don't make this a regional war. I am very cynical. I think that the world right now, including the United States, and I say cynical, I'm almost bitter about it, that what I'm hearing from the United States is you can do things as long as it doesn't touch all of us, meaning as long as you can keep it in a arena where what you're doing at the tactical and operational level is Israel against Hezbollah, Israel against Hamas, Israel even against the Islamic regime of Iran, just don't drag anybody else in. And that is a harsh saying that I'm saying because the Islamic regime of Iran and Hezbollah for that matter, or Hamas, are challenges for the entire region and for the United States. And to turn it into a frame where it's about Israel against all of them, as opposed to it being about a real world problem. And I like, Eran, that you use the term a free world. That is still part of the terms that we need to acknowledge. This is us as part of the free world, us, Israel, against horrific enemies, but it's not either or. We don't want to drag the entire world into a world war. I just think that we're already there and everybody's focusing and trying to act as if it's only Israel as the main antagonizer, which is a horrible way to put it.
The free world is under attack, and without sacrifice, freedom will not prevail, Mr. Oren.
It's a free world, but support is not free, especially since we tend to look at nations as unitary units.
Hasn't Israel paid with enough blood for...
No, but that's not the question. The question is the friendly regime in Washington has its own domestic problems. It has an audience which it must be attentive to. Now, we, as Miri said, can be cynical about it. But in a democracy such as the United States, it still matters, at least to be perceived as being attentive to what the constituencies, various constituencies, are saying. And therefore, Israel should at least try to make it easier for its supporters to help it, not to do anything provocative, to look as if it had no other choice, fine. But if it comes to a fork in the road and does something which was out of line, this does not help its friends to help it.
U.S. foreign policy ultimately dictates not only what's going to evolve here in the Middle East, but also the perception of the adversaries on a strategic power competition level of the U.S. capacity to withstand various trials and tribulations. If we're talking about the two other major sectors of the tectonic friction, as Dr. Barrahi said in our previous edition or sequence of this program, China, Russia, they're seeing everything that's evolving here, and the United States needs to take that into account. How do you see this right now within the various equilibriums?
Well, I think the balance is certainly has some positive elements in it. The total unmitigated defeat of the Iranian attack on the night of April 13 to 14 was actually a co-production of Israel and United States, allies in the region, and with some help also from European allies. It was a demonstration of technological superiority and of cooperation on an unprecedented scale. And I think that it is informing the decisions of both Hezbollah and Iran as they postpone further and further their threatened revenge for the death of leaders, the military commander of Hezbollah killed in Beirut, and Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, killed in Tehran, which the Iranians ascribe, and they probably have a reason of their own to do so, to Israel. But at the end of the day, when they calculate their options and they see the American presence, they see the Israeli capability, both to defend and to retaliate. I don't think that the story is one-sided. Yes, there have been American hesitations. Yes, Israel is obliged to listen to moderating American influence as it reacts to the horrors to which we've been subjected since October 7th. But having put all of these elements together, I don't think the Iranians come up on top. And I don't think the Houthis were taught a lesson. Hezbollah has its own limits. It is stretching the patience and the tolerance of the majority of Lebanese, who see them increasingly as Iranian occupation forces on their land, who are dragging them into a war they don't want. It's a complex balance, and much depends on the coherence and determination of American policy. I totally agree with what Amir said, that this is now colored, unfortunately, by the dynamics of an election season. And we would be in a much different position, I think, come November, one way or the other, because that will no longer be a constraint on American policymaking.
Colonel Eisin?
I'm very disturbed by Israel having become, in this year, specifically of 2024, of Israel's so just war against Hamas and the Gaza Strip, this issue which is just like the world has taken a turn. And I understand, Amir, most definitely, that at the end, United States and constituents and what that means. But what has come this year in 2024 in a way that I haven't seen so harshly in the past is that the Israel factor, and in this case it's being called the Gaza factor, is becoming part of the US election. And that immediately impacts what they do, what they say, how they act. And it's 2024, and we're still in a war. We still have 110 hostages. We still have, these different numbers as we talk about that and what it's doing to Israel. We're not the 51st state. We don't vote in the United States. We have a different policy. We live where we live. And that United States election year right now is having an impact. It's like we, Israel, are becoming much more than in the past a partisan issue, and that has forever scared me. I do not want to be a U.S. partisan issue. I want what's best for the United States of America, because a good, strong America, however you define it that way, is to me good for a good, strong Israel. And it isn't about whoever wins the elections, but right now, we have become partisan, where one side says this, the other side says that. To me, there's nothing good that can come out of that. And it impacts both our actions because they're highlighted, again, even at a tactical or operational level. I'm not even talking about strategic actions, that they're highlighted in a way which really impacts. I'll add in that I'm wary about the Russia issue. You talked more, you said China, you said, we talked about the United States, but that Russia element is also something that can have an adverse impact on U.S. Public opinion. And I'm very wary of that one as well.
Actually, it's forgotten now, but there is something of a precedent, and this was the oil embargo and the quadrupling of oil prices, especially for the consumer in the United States and in Western Europe, which was very hostile to Israel because of it in the winter of 1973. So Israel is something of a pawn in the bigger game between the superpowers, at least at the time, the Soviet Union and the United States, and the oil producers.
I think it's also important to know, you mentioned earlier the Democratic National Convention. The fringes of the parties are receiving more voice, and unfortunately, we see in conventions such as this one, a group of people holding a banner calling for an embargo of arms against Israel, something that you could never even imagine that would have happened in either party in the United States, let alone the Democratic Party. But when we're talking on the broader spectrum of things. In March of 2021, we had the famous meeting between U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese State Counselor Wang Yi, during the course of which the Chinese essentially told their American counterparts that we are in an age of strategic power competition. We're near peer nations or peer nations. I wasn't in that specific room, so I couldn't hear exactly the terminology. Nonetheless, when we're looking at that statement and how it has impacted the entire world, the impact to the Middle East has been vast. To what degree do we see this now in conformity with all the events transpiring?
Well, the Biden administration has rectified several of the mistakes that the Trump administration was responsible for. The Biden administration has improved the relationship with Australia and the Republic of Korea. NATO, which was downtrodden under Trump, has not only been back in action, but actually added 2 new members after the invasion of Ukraine. So the situation, all in all, is better under Biden than it was under Trump.
I'll beg to differ, but we don't have enough time to discuss all of that. Colonel Lerman,
let me say one thing, that the Chinese position on Israel, which used to be, let's say, tolerable, although there was some criticism of Israeli policy, but since October 7 has become poisonous in many respects. Very troubling choice of language and attitude, part of their broader hostility to America, something that we have to take into account. Luckily, the ability of the Chinese at this stage to have an effect on the military balance in the region is still quite limited, and America still has the tools to prevail if it makes the necessary decisions.
Colonel Eisin, I'd like to hear your position on this as well, and maybe to bring also into the equation the fact that the Chinese have invested quite heftily in the Islamic Republic of Iran. It didn't really evolve into something over significant beyond its military support and support of a few of the less strategic elements within the Iranian economy and the procurement, of course, of large volumes of oil. But you don't see the Chinese really investing in Iranian infrastructure as the Iranians expected, since the Chinese invested roughly 400 billion for a period of 25 years, which was supposed to be immense.
And here I am thinking again to myself that at the end, China chose a side. And I agree with Dr. Lerman. I mean, at this stage along the way, if there's one thing that, again, I may not be surprised by, but I'm appalled by, is that in this conflict of Israel against Hamas, Islamic terrorism, against the Islamic regime of Iran, it's against Hezbollah, in this time, China chose to take the other side. Its rhetoric against Israel is poisonous in ways that I have never seen before. And as China is an economic giant, we don't talk about it as a military security giant, but today these issues overlap. The development of technologies, of AI, the aspect of vehicles, of cars, these are things that are going to impact us all. China as that manufacturer of so many different things. So this world economic fight, with China taking a side on the political issues in our arena, again, looking into the end of 2024. The United States in an election year where we've become a partisan issue, never good news. China is taking a side against us, and at a time period where really we're at a low when it comes to what is, to me, the basic understanding of who we are and what we are. These are things we need to be focusing on, and we don't look at China, and I think we should more. We're much more focused on the United States. It has long-term implications for the economy of Israel, not just for the war that we're in right now and all of its importance.
In one sentence, for some optimism to be pushed into this, do you have something optimist?
Well, in 1940, the Republican candidate for the presidency, Wendell Willkie, against FDR, came up with the slogan, "One World," which was quite innovative for an isolationist party, which Trump is now trying to go back to. Everything is intertwined. The North Korean reactor in Syria had American perspectives to it. The Israeli relationship with Russia has to do with the Russian presence in Syria, and so on and so forth.
Indeed. Well, about Trump seeking to go back to isolationism, there are fringes within the party that do. It's not Trump, and it's not the majority of the Republican Party. Go ahead, Lerman.
Yeah, let's hope that whoever leads the United States past January 25 will resume the task of leadership of the free world. Without that, we are looking at a much darker future. But America still has the capacity and the moral high ground. Looking at Russia now in its signs of weakness, looking at let's say the slowing momentum of China, we need to look at the positives down the road and hope for leadership at the crucial moments.
Colonel Eisin?
I think that leadership is key here in Israel, in the United States. We're going to look at China, we're going to look at Russia, and let's hope that at the end, as we look forward, we see leadership that brings us to a different and better place.
And leadership in Europe, if I may also add to that. But I'd like to thank Colonel Eisin, Dr. Lerman, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli air and missile defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.